From ancient scrolls to modern classics, welcome to Whispers of Japanese Tales.
In a Grove by Ryunosuke Akutagawa. The Tale of the Woodcutter questioned by the inspector. Yes, it is as you say. I am indeed the one who discovered the body. This morning, as I always do, I went to the back mountain to cut cedar trees. That's when I found the body in the shadowy thicket of the mountainside. Where exactly? It was about 4 or 5 cho, approximately 400 to 500 meters, away from the road leading to Yamashina Station. The area is an uninhabited spot where thin bamboo mixes with scraggly cedar trees. The corpse was lying on its back, wearing a light blue suiken, an ancient Japanese garment, and a city-style lacquered cap. It had a single stab wound to the chest. Around the body, the bamboo leaves had turned a dark crimson as though stained with suha, a reddish dye. No, the blood was no longer flowing. The wound seemed to have dried. Moreover, a horsefly was clinging stubbornly to the body, seemingly unaware even of my approaching footsteps. Did you see a sword or anything like that? No, nothing of the sort. However, near the roots of a cedar tree close by, I did find a single length of rope lying there. And, oh yes, besides the rope, there was also a comb. Those were the only 2 items around the body. But the grass and fallen bamboo leaves in the area were trampled everywhere. So, without a doubt, the man must have struggled fiercely before he was killed. What? Was there no horse? There was no horse. That place is entirely inaccessible to horses. After all, the path used by horses is separated from the spot by a thicket. The tale of the traveling monk questioned by the inspector. I certainly did encounter that man yesterday. It was around noon, I believe. The location was on the road from Seikiyama to Yamashina, where I was traveling. The man was walking in the direction of Seikiyama, accompanied by a woman riding a horse. The woman had her face hidden by a mushi veil, so I couldn't see her features. All I could glimpse was the color of her garment, which seemed to resemble hagi gasein, a layered outfit in autumnal hues. As for the horse, it was a tsukage, cream-colored, horse. If I'm not mistaken, it appeared to be one of those hoshigami, monastic-style, horses. Its height? I'd estimate it stood about 4 shaku, approximately 120 centimeters, at the withers, though I can't say for sure. Monks aren't exactly horse experts, you know. The man? Oh, he was armed. He carried a sword at his side and also bore a bow and arrows. What's particularly vivid in my memory is the black lacquered quiver he wore, which held over 20 saya, arrows used for battle. I never imagined that man would end up like this, not even in my wildest dreams. Truly, human life is as fleeting as dew, or as ephemeral as a flash of lightning. There's no denying it. Ah, what a pitiful, sorrowful thing this has turned out to be. Words fail me. The tale of the pardoned man questioned by the inspector. The man I apprehended? Yes, without a doubt, it was Tajamaru, the infamous thief. When I caught him, he seemed to have fallen from his horse and was groaning in pain on the stone bridge at Wataguchi. The time? It was early last night, during the first watch of the evening. The last time I almost captured him, he was wearing the same dark blue suiken, court attire, and carrying an ornate sword. This time, as you can see, he was also armed with bows and arrows. What's that? The dead man was carrying similar items? Then there's no mistake. This Tajamaru must be the one who committed the murder. The leather-wrapped bow, the black lacquered quiver, and the 17 saya, arrows fletched with hawk feathers, all of these must have belonged to the victim. Yes, the horse was exactly as you said, a tsukage, cream-colored, horse with hoshigami traits. It must have been some twist of fate that caused this beast to throw its rider. When I found it, the horse was just beyond the stone bridge, standing by the roadside, eating blue pampas grass with its long halter still trailing behind it. This Tajamaru is infamous even among the thieves prowling Kyoto for being particularly obsessed with women. They say it was he who killed a woman and her young maid last autumn on the mountain behind Toriyabedra, where they had come to pray. If he truly killed the man in question, then the woman riding that cream-colored horse with him, who knows what became of her? I beg your pardon for overstepping, but I urge you to investigate that as well. The tale of the old woman questioned by the inspector. Yes, that corpse was my daughter's betrothed. However, he was not a man of the capital. He was a samurai from the provincial court of Wakasa, named Takahiro Kanazawa. He was 26 years old. No, he was a gentle and kind-hearted man. I can't imagine him having enemies or holding grudges against anyone. My daughter? Her name is Masago, and she's 19 years old. She's a spirited girl, not one to be outdone even by men. However, she has never been with any man other than Takahiro. Her face? She has a slightly dusky complexion, a small, oval face, and a distinctive mole at the corner of her left eye. Takahiro left with my daughter for Wakasa just yesterday. But to think it would come to this, what cruel twist of fate this must be. Still, what has become of my daughter? I may resign myself to the loss of my son-in-law, but the thought of her fate weighs heavily on my heart. I beg of you, with all the strength of this old woman's lifetime please, even if it means scouring through grass and trees, find out where my daughter has gone. As for that wretched man, Tajamaru, or whatever his name is, he's the one I can't forgive. Not only did he take my son-in-law, but my daughter as well. Here, her words trail off as she breaks down in tears. Tajamaru's confession. I killed that man. But the woman, I didn't kill her. Where did she go, you ask? That? I don't know. Now, hold on. No matter how much you torture me, I can't tell you something I don't know. And besides, now that things have come to this, I won't stoop to cowardly lies or concealment. Yesterday, a little past noon, I encountered that couple. At that moment, a gust of wind blew, and it lifted the mushi no terigyu, the veil, the woman was wearing. Just for an instant, I caught a glimpse of her face. In that fleeting moment, before I could fully process what I'd seen, it was gone again. Perhaps because of that brief glimpse, her face struck me as otherworldly, like that of a goddess, a neo-bosatsu, female bodhisattva. In that instant, I made up my mind. Even if I had to kill the man, I would take the woman for myself. Killing a man, you see, is not such a big deal as you might think. If you're going to take a woman, the man is bound to be killed. That's just how it is. Now, I kill with the sword at my waist. But you kill without swords. You kill with power, with money, or sometimes even with insincere, self-serving words. True, there's no blood, and the man may continue to live outwardly as though untouched, but even so, you have killed him. If we're to weigh the gravity of sins, who's worse, you or me? Which of us is truly more guilty? He smiles wryly. Still, if I could have taken the woman without killing the man, I wouldn't have been dissatisfied. In fact, at that moment, I resolved to avoid killing him if at all possible. But out there, on the open road near Yamashina, that simply wasn't an option. So, I devised a plan to lure the couple into the mountains. This was no trouble at all. Once I started traveling with the couple, I casually began telling them a story. I said that there was an ancient burial mound in the nearby mountains. When it was excavated, mirrors, swords, and other treasures were unearthed. I claimed that I had secretly reburied these items in the thicket of the mountain's shadow, far from anyone's notice. I told them that if they were interested, I'd be willing to sell the treasures for a very reasonable price. The man, gradually enticed by my story, began to show interest. And then, what can I say? Isn't human greed terrifying? Within less than half an hour, the couple had decided to follow me into the mountain path, turning their horse in my direction. When we reached the thicket, I told them, the treasures are buried in here. Come and see for yourself. The man, driven by greed, had no objections. However, the woman said she would stay behind on the horse and wait. Given how dense and overgrown the thicket was, her hesitation was understandable. But to me, it was all falling perfectly into place. Leaving the woman behind, I led the man into the thicket. The thicket was initially filled with bamboo. However, about half a cho, roughly 50 meters, in, the area opened up into a grove of thin cedar trees. For my purposes, I couldn't have asked for a better spot. As we pushed through the bamboo, I lied to the man, saying, the treasure is buried under one of these cedars. He believed me completely, and, driven by his greed, eagerly pressed forward toward the grove, where the sparse bamboo gave way to rows of cedar trees. Once we reached the grove, I wasted no time. I pounced on him and wrestled him to the ground. Though he had a sword and seemed strong, the element of surprise worked entirely in my favor. Within moments, I had him tied to the base of one of the cedar trees. As for the rope, it's a necessity for any thief. You never know when you'll need to scale a wall, so I always keep one at my waist. Of course, to keep him from making noise, I stuffed his mouth with bamboo leaves. That was enough to silence him and avoid any further trouble. After securing the man, I went back to the woman. I told her that her husband seemed to have fallen suddenly ill and asked her to come and see him. Naturally, this played out exactly as I'd expected. Without hesitation, she removed her ikai megasa, a type of woven hat for women, and let me lead her by the hand into the depths of the thicket. When we arrived, the man was tied to the base of a cedar tree. The moment the woman saw him in that state, she suddenly, and without my noticing before, pulled a dagger from her clothing. I've never encountered a woman with a temper as fierce as hers. If I'd been even slightly careless, she would have plunged the blade straight into my abdomen. Even as I dodged her initial thrust, she slashed wildly at me, without hesitation or thought. If I hadn't acted quickly, I might have sustained a serious injury. But I am Tajamaru, after all. Somehow, I managed to disarm her without even drawing my sword. No matter how strong-willed a woman is, without a weapon, she's powerless. In the end, as I had planned, I didn't take the man's life, but I did succeed in taking the woman for myself. I didn't take the man's life. Yes, that's right. Even after everything, I had no intention of killing him. However, as I was leaving the thicket, leaving the sobbing woman behind, she suddenly clung to my arm like a madwoman. Her grip was wild, desperate. Through her broken sobs, I heard her cry out, "Either you die, or my husband dies. One of you must die. Showing my shame to two men is worse than death itself." And then, between gasping breaths, she added, "Whichever one survives, I will stay with him." At that moment, a fierce, overwhelming urge to kill the man surged within me. The confession is tinged with a dark, brooding excitement. By telling you this, I'm sure I must seem like an especially cruel person in your eyes, but that's because you haven't seen the woman's face, especially the blazing fire in her eyes in that fleeting moment. When our eyes met, I thought to myself, even if struck down by divine lightning, I would still want to make this woman my wife. That thought, to make her my wife, was the only thing in my mind. This wasn't the base lust you might imagine. If it had been mere lust, I would have kicked her to the ground and fled. Had I done that, neither the man's blood nor my sword would have been stained. But in the dim thicket, at that very instant when I saw her face, I resolved that I would not leave this place unless I killed the man. However, even if I were to kill the man, I refused to do it in a cowardly way. I untied his ropes and challenged him to a sword fight. The rope left behind at the base of the cedar tree was what I had forgotten there after untying him. The man, his face twisted with rage, drew his large sword without a word and charged at me. There's no need to elaborate on how the fight unfolded. My blade pierced his chest on the 23rd strike. On the 23rd, please remember that. Even now, I take pride in that moment. To this day, he remains the only man who managed to cross 20 strikes with me before falling. He smiles brightly, with a trace of pride. When the man fell, I lowered my blood-stained sword and turned toward the woman. But, how can I explain it? She was nowhere to be found. I searched among the cedars, trying to see where she might have fled, but there was no sign of her on the fallen bamboo leaves. Even when I strained my ears, the only sound I could hear was the man's ragged, dying breaths. Perhaps, as soon as our duel began, she slipped away through the thicket to find help. That thought struck me, and since my life was now at stake, I grabbed the man's sword and bow and quickly made my way back to the mountain path. There, I found the woman's horse still grazing quietly on the grass. As for what happened after that, there's no need to waste your time with unnecessary details. Before I entered the capital, I had already disposed of the sword. That's all there is to my confession. I know my fate is to hang from the branches of a tree like a discarded log, so, please, see that I face the most severe punishment. He concludes with a defiant and resolute demeanor. The woman's confession at Kiyomizu Temple. After the man in the dark blue suiken, court attire, violated me, he looked at my bound husband and laughed mockingly. How tormented my husband must have felt in that moment. No matter how much he writhed in anger and frustration, the ropes digging into his body only tightened further, cutting deeper into his flesh. Overcome with despair, I instinctively tried to run to my husband's side. No, I wanted to run to him. But before I could, the man kicked me down in an instant. It was at that very moment that I noticed it, the indescribable gleam in my husband's eyes. Indescribable, just thinking about those eyes even now makes me shudder uncontrollably. My husband, who could not utter a single word, conveyed all his feelings in that one fleeting moment through his gaze. But what shone in his eyes wasn't anger, nor was it sorrow. It was something far colder, a contemptuous, scornful light directed at me. That cold, piercing look struck me harder than the man's kick. It felt as if my very soul had been shattered. Unconsciously, I let out a cry and, overwhelmed by the weight of it all, lost consciousness. When I finally regained consciousness, the man in the dark blue suiken was gone. He had disappeared somewhere, leaving behind only my husband, still bound to the base of the cedar tree. I managed to lift myself from the fallen bamboo leaves and turned my gaze toward my husband's face. But his eyes, they hadn't changed at all from before. That same cold contempt still burned in them, and beneath it, I could see a flicker of hatred. Shame, sorrow, anger, my heart was a chaotic storm of emotions, and I couldn't even begin to describe what I was feeling in that moment. Staggering to my feet, I approached my husband. "My dear," I said, "after what has happened, I can no longer stay with you. I am prepared to end my life in one decisive act. But," I hesitated, "you must also die. You have witnessed my shame, and I cannot bear to leave you behind to carry the burden of it alone." I said these words with all the strength I could muster. Even so, my husband continued to look at me with disgust, his gaze unwavering, piercing me with contempt. Unable to bear the pain tearing through my chest, I began searching for his sword, but it must have been taken by the thief. Neither the sword nor the bow could be found anywhere in the thicket. By some stroke of fate, however, the dagger was lying at my feet. I picked it up and, raising it high, turned to my husband once more and said, "Then allow me to take your life. I will follow you immediately after." When my husband heard these words, his lips finally began to move. Of course, his mouth was still stuffed full of bamboo leaves, so no sound came out, but as soon as I saw his lips move, I understood his words instantly. Even as he continued to look at me with contempt, my husband said a single word, "Kill." In a daze, as if in a dream, I plunged the dagger deep into the chest of his light blue suican without hesitation. I must have fainted again, because when I finally came to, my husband had already passed away. His lifeless body, still bound by the ropes, lay beneath the thin beams of the setting sun filtering through the cedar and bamboo above. I held back my sobs as I untied the ropes binding his corpse and cast them aside. And then, what happened to me after that, I no longer have the strength to say. In the end, no matter what I tried, I couldn't muster the strength to end my own life. I tried pressing the dagger against my throat, and even threw myself into a pond at the foot of the mountain, but no matter what I did, I couldn't die. As I sit here now, it's hardly something to boast about. She gives a faint, sorrowful smile. Perhaps even Canon, the bodhisattva of great compassion, has turned her back on someone as pathetic as I am. But what am I to do? I, who killed my own husband. I, who was defiled by a thief. What should become of me? What should I do? What can I do? Her voice falters, and she suddenly breaks into violent sobs. The story of the spirit through the mouth of the priestess. After violating my wife, the thief sat down nearby and began speaking to her, trying to comfort her with various words. As for me, I couldn't speak, and my body was still bound to the cedar tree. But during that time, I tried repeatedly to communicate with her through my eyes. I wanted to convey, "Don't believe a word this man says. Whatever he says is a lie." However, my wife sat quietly on the fallen bamboo leaves, her gaze fixed on her knees. She appeared to be listening intently to the thief's words. Seeing this, jealousy consumed me, and I writhed in frustration. But the thief, with a sly tongue, continued weaving his words skillfully, one after another. "If I've already defiled your body, it will surely be impossible to reconcile with your husband. So, why stay with him? Wouldn't you rather become my wife instead? I only acted so boldly because I find you so dear to me," the thief said, finally daring to propose such an outrageous idea. When the thief said this, my wife slowly raised her face, entranced. At that moment, I saw her as more beautiful than ever before. Never had she seemed so radiant to me. But that beautiful wife of mine, standing before me as I lay bound, what did she say in response to the thief? Even as I wander in the limbo of death, the memory of her reply fills me with unrelenting rage. She said these words with certainty. "Then take me wherever you wish." A long silence follows. My wife's sin doesn't end there. If that were all, I wouldn't be suffering as I am now, lost in this eternal darkness. But as if in a dream, she allowed the thief to take her hand, and together they started toward the edge of the thicket. Then, suddenly, her face turned pale. She pointed at me, still bound at the base of the cedar tree. "Kill him," she cried. "I cannot be with you as long as he is alive." Like a woman possessed, she screamed those words over and over again. "Kill him." Those words, like a raging storm, still hurl me into the depths of endless darkness. Has there ever been a phrase so hateful, so vile, ever spoken by human lips? Has there ever been a phrase so cursed, so loathsome, ever heard by human ears? Has there ever been? Suddenly, a burst of bitter laughter erupts, sharp and mocking. When those words left her mouth, even the thief was taken aback, his face blanching in shock. "Kill him," she screamed, clutching desperately at the thief's arm. But the thief, silent, simply stared at her without giving an answer, neither agreeing nor refusing. And then, before I could fully process what was happening, she was kicked down onto the bamboo leaves with a single, brutal motion. "Kill him," she had cried, only to be cast aside like that. Another bitter, mocking laugh bursts forth. The thief folded his arms calmly and turned his gaze toward me. "What should I do with this woman?" he asked. "Kill her, or let her live? Just nod if you have an answer. Kill her?" For that moment, and for that question alone, I almost want to forgive the thief for his sins. A long silence follows. While I hesitated to respond, my wife let out a cry and, before I could grasp what was happening, she bolted into the depths of the thicket. The thief lunged after her, but he couldn't even manage to grab her sleeve. I watched the scene unfold, unable to do anything, as if it were all some fleeting illusion. After my wife had vanished, the thief gathered up the sword and the bow. Then, cutting just one section of my rope, he said, "Now it's my turn." I still remember hearing him mutter those words as he disappeared beyond the edge of the thicket. After that, there was silence. No, not silence, there was still the sound of someone crying. I strained to listen while working to free myself from the ropes, but when I paid closer attention, I realized the voice I heard crying was my own. A third long silence follows. Exhausted, I finally rose from the base of the cedar tree. Before me lay the dagger my wife had dropped, glinting faintly in the light. I picked it up and, without hesitation, plunged it deep into my chest. Something warm and metallic surged up into my mouth, but there was no pain, none at all, only a growing coldness in my chest, and with it, the world around me fell eerily silent. Oh, what an uncanny stillness. In the shadow of the mountains, not even a single bird came to sing. The sunlight filtered weakly through the tops of the cedars and bamboos, hovering like a quiet, ghostly presence. But even that light began to fade. The trees and the world around me disappeared from view. Lying there, I was enveloped in a profound silence. Then I felt it. Someone creeping close to me on silent feet. I tried to look toward them, but by then, a pale darkness had already enshrouded me. Someone, though I couldn't see who, reached out with unseen hands and gently pulled the dagger from my chest. As the blade was withdrawn, my mouth filled once more with the rush of blood. And with that, I sank into the eternal darkness of limbo, never to return.
Until we meet again, may the stories of Japan inspire your days. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales.